Lifelab session number 8. Welcome. Just a quick review of last week. We looked at our emotions. We looked at the part of us, how we were made, spirit, soul, and body. And we've been kind of ripping apart the soul part, where we saw our emotions. And we looked at fear, and we looked at anger, and we went through communication styles. There was 4 different styles. And then we went through the behavioral sequence. So that was the application to kind of changing your thought pattern, because what you think, you will do. So the 4 types of communications was passive-aggressive, aggressive, assertive, and passive. So the fundamentals of the definition, if I say assertive, what do we try to put into practice? It's I count and you count. So that's the kind of language we have to have in our minds. How do we set boundaries? How do we make it so that both people count and both people are heard and that boundaries aren't crossed? Then we looked at the application of the tool that I gave you, and that's called the behavioral sequence. So just a quick review, we had an outside cue. So something that happens outside of you, and is that something that we can change? Some of us think that we do control the outside cues. Many of us that have control issues, we try to control everything around us because inside we feel no control. So we might temporarily think that we can change what's happening out of us, people, places, or things. And so what we've learned is that we have no control over that. That's the outside cue. I cannot control it. So then we looked at, in the behavioral sequence, we have what we call an inside cue. Can you change that? Yes, you can. The answer is yes. That is my responsibility. My response is my responsibility. So then there's an inside cue that goes off, and we need a tape and we need a counter. So the tape that we'll hear when the inside cue goes off, there could be a loud noise outside. There could be somebody that gave you the cold shoulder, and there's something inside of you that rises up that says, oh, I'm being discounted, I'm being excluded, or, oh, a big noise, and it might bring you back to an inside cue of your family of origin and yelling and screaming and that kind of thing. So the inside cue is really the thing that we want to change, because the inside cue leads us to the result or the consequence so that we want to change. So again, this is, how do I change unhealthy or non-productive results or consequences due to outside cues? So the inside cue, we had the tape. So the tape runneth. That's the thing that we want to challenge. That's the thing that we want to change. And then we have a counter. So we want to change the tape. We want to erase and re-record. So there was a couple rules about the counter. The counter had to be believable. You had to buy it. You had to really buy into it. It couldn't be just something that you made up and didn't really believe. And it had to be doable. It had to have an action to it, and it has to be assertive. So I count, you count. So the cue, again, has to be believable. You have to buy into it. It has to be assertive, and it has to be an action item. Why does it have to be an action item? Because your thought will cause your action. So you want to prep your actions and have a different outcome from before. So an outside cue could also be money, right? It could be time. This is the clock. Those kind of things, right? My busyness, my paycheck, those can be outside cues, And if I blow all my money or if I'm in debt, I don't want to be in debt and I want to change this. This is how I can do it because I'm having an emotional response. There's things that are happening inside of me called tapes. I want to change the tape because I want to change the result. All right, so then we have, what do we have? We have an action. We have an action. So we out of the action, you get, remember we talked about boots, a boot to the bum, or a cookie. And this is how we all learn. We, getting boots, we don't learn. We go, okay, that doesn't pay off. We want cookies. So our behavioral will change once we get a reward system. And so even negative or unpleasant inside cues, we can reward them by protecting ourselves or by making us feel good by spending our whole paycheck, that kind of thing. Undisciplined stuff, but we want to change that. So we have to actually look for a new cookie. So when you're in an argument or something and you want to change the outcome because you seem like you have uncontrollable anger, or maybe you just don't like waking up to arguing half the day and having conflict. And so the one thing you could do is we thought of all the different actions. One could be a timeout. One could be say nothing. One could be don't defend yourself. And if you've done something for so long, for 20 years, all of a sudden you're doing the opposite of it, and it's really hard. And I watched this marriage counseling video, and they said, how do you know how to do this? How do you incorporate change? And they said the most mature person would go first. So that might be your encouragement to do something different, to give yourself a timeout, not to continue the arguing, not to defend yourself. And that can be a cookie, because the cookie is, hey, conflict resolution. It was peaceful. No one punched a hole in the wall. Yay! Hey, we're living on a budget. Hey, we have savings. Hey, we can do little things that we couldn't do before. So that's what happens in a behavioral sequence. So then you have your results. Results. So this is how we all learn. This is how we're not robots. So this is what happens within us. And we want to change unhealthy results, unhealthy consequences. And so this is the way that we do it. So we gave you some homework, and hopefully you can take that up with your pace setter. You have the behavioral sequence chart, and that will show you how to really hear what's going on inside. Because most people that have these negative results or consequences, they actually don't realize. They just say, I fly off the handle. I don't think before I act. But the truth is that we aren't robots, and we all do act. And we all do, there is a sequence of things that happen within us. So that's what we want to do, is really slow down and really understand what's happening within us to be able to make the change. This isn't easy. I find people really have challenges with it. When I teach this in a therapeutic environment, we do this for 3 to 4 months. And so because you guys are super smart, we've taken the last 2 classes, and with your help of with your pace setter, then you can do this on a weekly basis. Because if you're anything like me, you have outside cues that give you a response inside that necessarily isn't pleasant. So it's not about always being happy, but it's about dealing with your emotions properly. And so that is our responsibility. We can change. Whew! All right. Now that, I don't have my whiteboard wiper. So we're going to look at, continue looking at our soul. So this is how we are made in three little circles that all connect. We have a spirit, we have a soul, and we have our body. And we're going to continue to look at our soul and a bit of our body. So our body is our physical matter, our flesh, our blood, our bones, our organs. Our spirit is our mind, will, and emotions. Emotes. So the emotions is what we feel, the mind is our intellect, and our will is our thoughts. And then our spirit is where we should be living life out of. We should be living out of our identity. That's where our spirit is. Our identity, our true identity resides in our spirit. Our communication with God, our worship, our creativity, all these things are part of our spirit. In this journey, this is the Spirit of God. And what we've come to realize due to the way that we were living, the rules of the road, 50 kilometers an hour, me going 80 kilometers an hour, created barriers to peace, to joy, to the things that God would fill me with. And so our goal in this journey is to get rid of the blocks, have a spiritual awakening, and live by the Spirit of God. And then in turn, the behavioral sequences get way easier. Maybe some of the issues you're having with sleeping or other bodily issues, maybe some of those will subside. And so this is how we were designed and made. So we're going to quickly look at what our mind is. It is our intellect, as defined in the dictionary, the part or faculty of a person by which one feels, perceives, thinks, remembers, desires, and imagines, or a person of great mental ability. The healthy mental state of mind, sanity, losing one's mind. So this is kind of the intellectual part of us. Hey, I've had these experiences, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 divided by 3 equals, not a math scholar, but it equals something, I'm sure, and we do this all day in our intellect. And so for my example, I was at the homeless shelter in 2005, and I went through their treatment center. I had to learn to live without drugs and alcohol because it stopped being my solution. And so I went on this 12-step journey in Alcoholics Anonymous and had a spiritual awakening, and the rest is history. But it was a battle at the beginning because they're asking me to turn over all of my thinking and my actions to God. What does God want to do? Some of this stuff, typically I can figure out very easily. How to pay my bills, how to pay for my Wi-Fi, how to pay for the food and the clothes that go on our backs. Like, I've had 30 some odd years of experience to be able to do this stuff, so it's relatively easy. I had a couple trades. I was in the elevator union and then drove heavy equipment, and still to this day I have my AZ license so I can drive tractor trailers. Super easy to figure out what I can do, and this is what that job is worth, and this is the lifestyle that we could live. So I finished treatment down at the homeless shelter. I reintegrate back home, get a job because that's what you're supposed to do. Trying to make up for lost time isn't necessarily the right thing. And I found myself relapsing here and there. I got back into heavy equipment and was able to pay my bills, but I wasn't able to stay sober. I went to the doctor's office because I had to get a renewal on my medical form for my AZ license. I had let it expire. I had a couple appointments and wasn't in the right state of mind to go and pass a physical. And so I went to go see my doctor. You have 2 years to reapply. So I go apply. I bring him the paperwork. He does the checkup, and then we talked about addiction. And he goes, "Well, now what? What are you going to do?" He goes, "Weren't you in the elevator trade?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, well, that's a no-brainer. Get back in it." And he broke it down in a way that, as a GP, as a doctor, he said, "I spent this much time in school. I'm 10 years out of school or whatever he was, and he goes, I still am just getting over the debt. And this is what a GP makes, and this is what an elevator guy makes. He goes, it's a no-brainer. Get back into the industry, get back into the trade. And I walked out of there going, yeah, that's a no-brainer. That's good money. That's a retirement plan. It's all laid out for me. And I actually went down to the Union Hall. They were quite surprised to see me. I had dropped off the face of the earth, and I was back at it, filled out some paperwork, and I never heard from them again. And over the course of the next few weeks, I was still worked heavy equipment, but I was really bothered with the voice of, did I get sober to do this? Did I get sober to grind and save and pay my bills? And there was an uneasy, restless thing happening. One day, the yard was shut down because it was raining a little bit, and so I went, bugged my dad to make me breakfast and watch a video, a teaching video. And in this teaching video, the preacher was talking about, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be given unto you. And it really, a light bulb came on, and I said, I've done everything backwards my whole life. I had children. I had a retirement plan before I went to work, and I've done everything backwards. I got married after kids, and my life was a mess backwards. And I said, maybe I'm doing recovery backwards, because I'm doing all these things, and where am I fitting in the things of God and recovery? And so it forced me to really examine that. The light bulb goes off, and I said, hey, you got me sober. Lots of people can get me a job. If I need a job, you go get me a job. I'm not going to look, I'm not going to help you, but I'm going to go where you are. So I went to every drop-in, I went to every AA meeting and NA meeting and little Bible study and drop-in kitchen to volunteer, and I never asked anybody for a job. And in this time, there was groceries on my doorstep. I never asked anybody for a dime. I was giving this job to God, and I was pretty sure he didn't need my help. And over the course of the next few months, we always had food. Sometimes it was on our doorstep in boxes, and it was just really mind-blowing. One day, a man where I was volunteering asked me to come upstairs, and he ran houses for mentally ill people. And I'm a little boisterous, so I thought I had offended people and done something wrong. And so he sat me down and he said, hey, John, would you like to be an overnight worker at one of our care homes? And it was the first time I ever had a tear in my eye about a job. And I just figured that this was a job that God gave me. So my intellect can get in the way of God's will for my life. And so when I'm intellectualizing, I'm usually in denial of what's really available to me and around me. I make up my mind due to my experiences, because I did pay the bills. I did buy a house. I did have a car, all those things. But if I really put my belief in God and turn over my will and my life over to the care of Him, then He's going to take care of me. My goal has to be, am I passing on the message of hope? Am I relating this message to others? And that should be the focus of my life. And here I am today, living the dream. The will. So that's the mind, the intellect, and then the will. God's will be done. Sometimes I write little notes here and I wonder why. Cool. All right, the will can be defined as our thoughts. In the dictionary it says to decide or intend, to yearn for or desire, to introduce or to try to introduce by sheer force of will, to grant in a legal will. So it means different things. This is our never-ending battle, turning our thoughts and our intellect over to God. Not my will be done, but God's will be done. Our minds and our wills will be predominantly influenced by our experiences in what ways we try to solve our own life's problems and think ourselves in and out of situations. And so I guess the question is, who is your number one influencer? Who is the one that gives you the most input, the most direction, the most commentary? Who's the one that influences you the most? And always when I ask that question, I think people's first reactions is a certain teacher or a parent or a scout leader or something, some person. But the reality is, it is you. It is yourself, because you're always in a conversation with yourself. And if you think about it, the things that you thought about yourself, towards yourself, if somebody else was saying them, they probably wouldn't be your friend. You'd probably be really hurt because they've put you down, they've condemned you, they've spoken curses over you. You'll never, what's the point? That kind of thing. And so we really have to take captive our thoughts. And I know that my will and God's will are very different. And so what I've learned is that my will is really about me, is about self. I think about myself a lot. I think about how others perceive me. I think about what I'm doing wrong a lot. I think about how I could do things better. So it's a lot about self. And God's will, I think there's a lot of theology debates about this, but I think overall God's will can be really simple. And it's about others. And I might have not been a great example of superstar in recovery when I started working with mentally ill people, but I loved going in there and I loved sharing my hope with them. I remember it stretched all my boundaries coming from construction world and working with my hands and machinery to working with people's minds and giving them meds. And I remember this one guy, he just, every night he'd ask me to put his mask on and he had sleep apnea and pray for him. And it was like, wow, like this is not how I would do things. This is not how I would imagine things for my life. If you were my intake worker in 2005, and if you said, hey, John Ruby, welcome in. You're going to love this recovery stuff. Number one, you're going to turn your will and your life over to Jesus. And you're going to be an ordained pastor, and you're not going to work in. I probably would have hit you and laughed. And if you had said you'll be a public speaker, I would have said for sure that's not for me. I'd rather go try drink again. And so the beautiful thing about recovery and relationship with God, He draws you in, He builds you, He changes your mindset and the way you think. And soon you stop focusing on self and you start focusing on others. And where that brings you is your own journey and your own relationship with God. Yeah? All right, I have a little story. This is a story that my mom, I always felt like my mom read it to me 100 times, but I don't think she did. She probably read it to me twice and it stuck. So here's a little story out of a book by Sheldon Vanniken. And this kind of encapsulates your intellect and your mind. Gypsy, a furry, wheat-colored collie, found herself in possession of several hundred acres of hills and woods, full of good things like rabbit trails and streams and intriguing burrows. And she delighted in it all. She was given a comfortable bed and good meals. Perhaps she rather took it all for granted. But obligations were few, and they were not too heavy. She was, to be sure, supposed to worship her master and be right joyous to be with him. She knew she must not chase the chickens. While she must obey certain commands to follow, to come, to lie down, there were no unreasonable ones and no tricks. After all, to obey and to worship were her natural to her and her dog nature. Then there came a day as Gypsy was prowling on the far hill past the spring house and pasture. Two things happened at once. The master called her, and a rabbit fled across the field. Gypsy wheeled and raced toward the master, as she had always done, but then stopped. It entered her mind that she didn't have to obey. Perhaps the master didn't understand about that rabbit. Anyhow, these were her hills. The rabbit was hers too. Very luckily, it was all lies. That story of everything, including herself, belonging to the master. How did she know that the food in her dish came from him? Probably there was some natural explanation. She was a free dog, and that was the end of it. These thoughts went through her mind swiftly, while she stood irresolute. Again, the master's command, and the rabbit crossed the hilltop. Gypsy whirled and raced after the rabbit. She made her choice. She was free to choose. Hours later, she came home. She saw the master waiting for her, but she did not rush gladly to him, leaping and frisking, as she had always done. Something new came into her demeanor. Guilt. She crept up to him like a snake on her belly. Undoubtedly, she was penitent at the moment, but she had a new knowledge of the possibility of sin. It was a thrill in her heart and a salt taste in her mouth. Nevertheless, she was very obedient next day and the day after. Eventually, though, there was another rabbit, and she did not even hesitate. Soon it was the mere possibility of a rabbit. And then she dropped the rabbit thing altogether and went her own way. The master loved her, but trusted her no longer. In time, she lived in a pen and went for walks on leash. All of her real freedom was gone, but the master gave her, from time to time, new chances to obey of her own free will. She had chosen to obey. Had she chosen to obey, she would again have had perfect freedom to wander the hills, her hills, 100 acres of them. But she did not return to the obedience. She always chose, if she were out of reach, to run away. The master, knowing hunger would always bring her back to her pen, let her run. He could have stopped her. The rifle that would have ended her rebellion with the crack of doom stood in the corner. While she lived, she still might return to the obedience that had always been her freedom. One day, during a journey by car, Gypsy and her good little daughter Flurry were taken into the edge of the forest. Always Gypsy had limited her disobedience to her own hills. Now, coming back to the car, she finally felt the old thrill. She turned and fled. The master called with a note of urgency. Flurry, with a courtesy that always ruled her, came at once. Gypsy, her ears dulled to the meanings of the master, continued to rush into the dark forest. After hours of searching and calling, the master sadly abandoned the lost one, and with Flurry beside him, went home. There Flurry continued to live in freedom under the obedience. She was right joyous to be with the master, and happy when she did things that pleased him. She knew that in his service was perfect freedom. She obeyed gladly through her own free choice. But lost Gypsy, if she still lived, wandered the woods and roads an outcast. She became dirty and matted with burrs. No doubt stones were thrown at her, and she was often hungry. But she had lost her way home. If she had puppies, they too and their children had lost the way home. Gypsy's perilous and bent will to disobey must infect them too. The comforting hand of the master would be unknown to them, except as a tale. This is the way Gypsy chose on the day of the rabbit, and continued to choose until suddenly there was no more choosing. That's a powerful story. And just shows that where our will and our thoughts and our intellect can get us. And then we see the learned behavior, and you don't even feel that you think anymore. So that's really the importance of the behavioral sequence, and really to understand that there is another way, that there are different results, and that you're not trapped, and that you can make different choices. Yeah, Yeah? Yeah. All right. So we're going to quick look at the body. And so this is super interesting to very few people. There's a lot of information, a lot of studying on the brain. I think in our lifetime we use 8, 10, 12% of our brain. It's not very much. And so all the studies and the information compiled, there are some interesting studies done. And how we learn, and the dopamine and all the things that produce addiction. I find fascinating, but most people don't, and there's a lot to it. So I feel that there are when I hear the word addiction, I kind of hear the opposite of addiction is connection. And so that's what we've tried to do as a community outside of rehab, is build more of that community connection. And I've seen countless people come and get sober. They might have relapsed, but as long as they're in community and being connected to the Spirit of God, then there's still hope of recovery. When I get asked the question, what is addiction? I always think of two different styles of addiction, or two different types of addiction. There's one addiction, and we can all be subjected to that. And so let's say we take the 10 of us, and we take a room full of people, 10 of us, and we every day we get our meds, maybe 2-3 times a day, and let's say it's Oxycontin. And after 21 or 28 days, they say, no more Oxycontin, right? What happens? We're itching. We're biting our arms off. We're feeling weird inside. We might be sick. We might get the sweats. For probably about 3 days, we will all experience that. It doesn't matter who you are. And so that would be a physical addiction, where you're all addicted to it. You can stop it. They've done studies, and where they get the percentage from, there's a couple studies, Vietnam study and a rat park study. We'll kind of go into that a little bit, but the Vietnam story was a lot of the Vietnam army was addicted, or was consuming anything that they could get their hands on, because they're in war-torn countries, and there was little hope. So why not drink and smoke whatever's available? Opium was available and readily available. So they did a study on the people, the men that came back, the men and women that came back, and they tracked the ones that had been smoking opium every day. And out of all the people that they tracked, only 10% of them couldn't go back to normal life. They kept using, they kept getting into trouble, and so there's the 100% of people that will have a physical addiction to anything, and we all do, because it's a substance that we withdraw off of, and your body has been accustomed to taking it in. And so when we withdraw, we actually get a physical craving, but we can get over it. So 100% of those people, and then 10% of the people think about it more. Go looking for other stuff. It's interesting, another stat in the alcohol world, the beer store and the alcohol, it's only 10% of the people that buy 90% of the alcohol. So it kind of supports the Vietnam vet study and the rat park study. So the other part of it, the disease of addiction, what our medical system has called a disease. I look at this as a physical addiction, and then disease of addiction. The disease of addiction obviously has the body part of it, but then it also has a mental part of it. So the thing is, and what we call it of it is the obsession. So you have an obsession, and it's not like I'm always thinking about it, but I think about it in a manner that it minimizes it. I lie to myself. So the obsession in my mind says, I can do that again differently. I can do it this way and not get those consequences. The obsession is about controlling. Controlling the substance that I'm putting into my body, because I am actually feeling ease and comfort. And so the real problem lies in here. That's 90%. Most people can get over the physical addiction, where we look at it, the obsession of having one, and you hear that saying of 1,000 are too many, and no, one is never enough. Sorry, I butchered that one. But if I have the first one, it leads to the 100th one. And so the trick is never having the first one. So that's 90% of the problem. And so that obsession, that controlling part, where it says, I can do it again without damage. I can do it again just like normal people, whatever the normal people look like. So this is kind of, when I think of addiction, is a physical dependency is one thing that we would all have. And then the disease of addiction, about 10% of us would have it, where there's actual physical obsessions, and those obsessions lead to consumption, and upon consumption there's a chemical released where it produces a craving for more and more and more, and instead of getting tired, that person would liven up and wake up and have no problem going to work with half an hour of sleep, if that, on the third day. And so there's two different things going on there. So that's what I think of when I hear addiction. So there's a lot of terminology of how this all works, and I'm just going to read a short paragraph, but in your books there's way more explanation to it, and how everything works together. Our bodies react to stress and anxiety. This activates the autonomic nervous system, in particular the sympathetic system, where and how we deal with stress from inside or from the outside or from the inside. So it's how we deal with stress. We have stress all around us. Every day there's stress. This autonomic nervous system is the part of dealing with stress. The hypothalamus kicks in and acts as a regulator of the body and finds a solution for what's going on. This is normal and God-given. The problem comes when we add an addictive solution to deal with what's happening inside of us due to outside or even inside stimuli. Solutions such as alcohol, drugs, porn, TV, books, our children or other relationships, or even our smartphones are some of the many things that can be used as a solution to our problems. Some of these things are not bad if done once in a while, but if done more often, the hypothalamus, that's the body's regulator, will stop working properly because we are overriding it, and if any stimulus experienced repetitively or that has a strong enough impact on our brain begins to change in structure accordingly and becomes dependent on what we put into ourselves to cope. The hippocampus activates the short-term memory of how stress was dealt with and will remember the solution for the next time. The problem worsens when we give our bodies a negative solution. There is always withdrawal that produces stress to the body once again, and the cycle continues over and over and over until we can learn to become healthy. I don't know if that made sense, but there's a couple of things. Your body has the ability to handle stress on its own naturally. Some of us are more adept to it. Some of us struggle with it. Some of us need medication for it. And so what happens is that your body is supposed to be able to find that solution itself and release chemicals and serotonin and that stuff to be able to calm your nervous system. And then the hippocampus is the little snapshot thing that takes the picture of this work, we keep doing it. And so that should all be happening inside of you. And so the problem is when I put a drug in my body, it releases all the feel-good chemicals, and that's how I become addicted to them. So is smoking weed a great medication for somebody dealing with anxiety? No, because what happens is with a substance that you withdraw off of, what will happen is that once you start withdrawing off of marijuana or even nicotine, tobacco, is that your body produces stress and anxiety. I don't know if you can relate to smoking cigarettes, but that person that smokes cigarettes is out the door every 45 minutes to half an hour, and or sooner. And so you have this anxiety and stress within you, and when you do this, it brings all that away. But if you use something outside of you, and if your hypothalamus isn't regulating your body, then it always goes to that. So having an addictive substance such as THC and marijuana to deal with stress and anxiety is not a long-term thing. It implodes at the end. So where they get this 21, where they get the number 21 or 28 days at a rehab center, because maybe if you know the short-term rehab centers are 21 or 28 days, they've done studies of that's how long it takes to break a habit. So when you're talking about a habit of your physical self, then you should be able to break a habit, whether it's smoking or whatever. What are some habits? I can't even think right now. But you can break a habit, and maybe it's an unhealthy thing, and you can change how you do things. So they say it takes that long to break a habit, but when we look at the disease of addiction, it's not a habit, it's a disease, so you have to treat it accordingly. Okay, so you have in your notes there the rest of the information. I have the rat park study that was really interesting, where they studied a whole bunch of rats where they would drink fluid from 2 drop dispensers. When they were alone, they would go to the opiate one, and I think it was like 90% of the time they would go to the opiate one, and then they built this rat park. And so all the rats would hang out there, and very few of them, I think it was 10% of them, they still had the same 2 drop water dispensers. Only 10% of them would go to the opiate one. So when they were in community and connection, they were way less likely to go back to the opiate one. So 10% of those rats became crackheads on the streets of Ottawa, begging for change. So that's kind of the overview of your mind and your will. We looked at the emotions. We gave you the behavioral sequence to be able to actually give you a tool to be able to change the way you're thinking, to be able to get a different result from the negative ones that you've had. And then the quick overview of our body. How our body can be in control. We are supposed to be spirit-led, and everything else should fall in line. Maybe the one thing that I missed is, how does your body be in control? And so obviously having a disease, having an addiction, having allergies, a peanut allergy, your spirit and your mind, will, and emotions are not in control. Your body is, because you're having trouble breathing and whatnot. And you need some anaphylactic care. What is it? Blue to the sky and orange to the thigh. There it is. You can read more into that, and we'll see you all next week. Have a great week. Talk to your pay setters. Do your homework. We still have the 100 or the 189 questions. The 35 questions have been taken up, and continue to do the daily practices. All right, goodbye. And then for homework, we're going to look at triggers. So a beautiful word called triggers, and that basically is the outside cue. Outside cues. So we want to be self-aware. So we have in your books, you have the thing on triggers, and we have some questions that we want to go through, how to deal with triggers, what triggers that you have, and it's about being self-aware. So I know that I've dealt with many guys with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and as somebody that facilitates a recovery home and dealing with counseling, one of the things that we learn is not to touch people. Yeah, we can give hugs upon request, but even touching somebody's shoulder at the dinner table. I've touched a guy's shoulder and he recoiled very quickly, dropped his food, and it was very embarrassing for him. But he had a trigger that happened within him because of his abuse as a kid. And so those are the kind of things that we want to deal with. So really look at this homework assignment and really start to understand your triggers and be aware of them. The memories and the emotions and the people the places and other things that have to do with these triggers, because we don't want to be controlled by triggers and by the outside cues. So we're going to look at that homework assignment and answer the questions that are there. And there you go. So triggers, one other thing is that triggers are easily overcome by identifying them, confessing them, being aware of them, and then even exposure. So in the Addiction Treatment Center, there were things that we did that seemed childish for adults. One, taking a phone away, taking cell phones away. How could you do that? John Ruby, that's the horrible thing. But the point is, if you're in 9-month addiction treatment center, the point isn't to be on the phone and trying to solve her problem or his problem or having access to the outside world. It's inward focused. And then the buddy system. The buddy system actually helps reduce stress, where people would say, oh no, this is horrible, you're controlling us. But on the buddy system, there's a lot less things that can happen, and you got somebody to help coach you or help you out of a situation that you might get in. You might run into a friend. And so it's actually reducing stress, because once you hit enough stress as an alcoholic or an addict, what we've just learned is that your body goes in automatic mode and goes, I have this much stress, this is what we do. We go drinking. We need to go drinking. And I know the feeling personally is that you're not in control of yourself, and all of a sudden everything that you've worked for, everything that you've gained is you're sitting at a bar and you're drinking. And 3 days later, you're wondering why you lost it all, threw it down the drain, got kicked out of rehab. So those are little things that we helped guys in early recovery to reduce the stress, because the stress, whenever there's stress, your body is designed to look for a solution. And if you've given it drugs and alcohol for 15 years, it's not easy to get out of. So do the homework, triggers, and we'll see you next week.